I never thought I'd be the kind of person to chase ghosts. I always considered myself a rational, grounded individual, firmly rooted in the tangible realities of the world. But something changed in me after my marriage fell apart, and my career took a nosedive. I needed a distraction, an escape from my daily life. That's how I found myself driving to Villisca, Iowa, to spend a night in the infamous Villisca Axe Murder House. The Villisca Axe Murder House is notorious among ghost hunters and horror enthusiasts. The site of a gruesome, unsolved 1912 murder, in which 6 children and 2 adults had their skulls crushed by an unknown perpetrator wielding an axe, had been restored to its 1912 condition and turned into a tourist attraction. The stories of paranormal activity were plentiful. Visions of a man with an axe, faint screams of children, and an oppressive, dark presence that seemed to linger in every room. I was skeptical but intrigued. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or just a desire to feel something different, something beyond the mundane disappointments of my life. Whatever the reason, I booked a night in the Villisca Axe Murder House, ready to face whatever lay within its walls. I arrived in Villisca on a chilly November afternoon. The town had a quaint, old-fashioned charm, with its main street lined with mom-and-pop stores and diners. As I drove through, the sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The Villisca Axe Murder House stood at the end of a quiet street, an unassuming white frame house that looked like any other rural home from the early 20th century. But as I parked my car and walked towards the house, I felt an undeniable heaviness in the air, a sense of foreboding that sent a shiver down my spine. I met with Martha Lynn, the owner of the house, who handed me the keys and wished me luck. She seemed kind but weary, like someone who had seen too much and carried the weight of it all. "The house is all yours for the night," she said. "Just remember, it's just a house. Whatever happens, keep telling yourself that." I nodded, trying to muster a smile, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She knew what this place could do to people. The interior of the house was meticulously restored to its 1912 condition. The furniture, wallpaper, and even the kitchen utensils were all period appropriate. It was like stepping back in time. I walked through the rooms, trying to imagine what life was like for the Moore family and their guests on that fateful night in 1912. The living room felt cold despite the heater I brought. I set up my sleeping bag and placed my flashlight and snacks within reach. I planned to stay up all night, recording any strange occurrences with my camcorder. Part of me hoped to capture something supernatural, while another part hoped for an uneventful night. As the evening turned into night, the house seemed to grow darker, the shadows longer. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. I sat in the living room, reviewing the history of the murders and the numerous reports of paranormal activity. The clock ticked steadily, a reminder that time was passing. But in that house, it felt like time had stood still since 1912. Around midnight, I heard the first sign that something was amiss. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the upstairs bedrooms. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously made my way up the narrow staircase. The air grew colder with each step, and I felt a growing sense of dread. I reached the top of the stairs and stood in the hallway, shining my flashlight into each room. The tapping continued, leading me to the room where the Moore children had been found. The sight of the old iron bed, the worn-out toys, and the faded wallpaper sent chills down my spine. The tapping seemed to come from the closet. I took a deep breath and opened the door, but there was nothing inside. As I stood there, the temperature plummeted and I felt a presence behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I backed out of the room, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I returned to the living room, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I sat back down, my heart still pounding. I decided to review the footage on my camcorder, hoping to catch something that would explain the tapping. As I watched the playback, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There in the corner of the screen was a shadowy figure standing in the hallway. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I rewound the footage and watched it again, my hands trembling. The figure was tall and slender, with what looked like an axe resting on its shoulder. It stood motionless for a few seconds before disappearing into thin air. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I replayed the footage multiple times, but the figure was unmistakable. I felt a surge of adrenaline and fear. I was no longer alone in the house. I could feel the presence growing stronger, the air thick with tension. I debated whether to leave, but my curiosity and determination kept me rooted to the spot. I wanted to know more, to understand what was haunting this place. Around 2 a.m., the house came alive with sounds. It started with faint whispers, barely audible, like a distant conversation. I strained to listen, but the words were indistinguishable. The whispers grew louder, joined by the sound of children laughing and crying. It was a haunting, melancholic sound that echoed through the halls. I followed the sounds, my flashlight flickering as I moved. The laughter seemed to come from the children's bedroom, while the crying came from the parents' room. I stood in the hallway, torn between the two, feeling the weight of their sorrow and fear. The sounds were so real, so vivid, that I could almost see the events of that night unfolding before my eyes. I entered the children's bedroom first. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I banged on the door, shouting for help, but no sound came out. I turned around and there he was, the figure with the axe standing at the foot of the bed. His eyes were dark voids, his face twisted in a grotesque mask of rage and hatred. He raised the axe, and I felt a searing pain in my chest. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. The pain was overwhelming, and I fell to the floor, clutching my chest. The figure vanished and the door flew open. I crawled out of the room, gasping for breath. I made my way to the living room, where I collapsed on the floor. The pain subsided, but the fear remained. I looked down at my chest, expecting to see a wound, but there was nothing. No blood, no mark. Just an intense, lingering pain. I realized then that the figure wasn't just a ghost. It was something more, something malevolent and powerful. It had the ability to inflict real pain, to manipulate the physical world. I had underestimated the darkness that lurked in the Villisca Axe Murder House. As I lay there trying to catch my breath, I heard a voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, but clear enough to understand. "Help us," it said. "Find the truth." I looked around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from within my own mind, a desperate plea for help. I knew then that the spirits of the Moore family were still trapped in the house, unable to move on until the truth was uncovered. I spent the rest of the night researching, poring over old newspapers and police reports. I found out that the investigation into the murders had been plagued with inconsistencies and dead ends. Suspects were questioned but released, and the case remained unsolved. The more I read, the more I realized that the truth had been buried, hidden away to protect those involved. Determined to help the spirits find peace, I decided to confront the malevolent entity once and for all. I gathered my courage and returned to the children's bedroom where the figure had appeared. I stood in the center of the room, holding my flashlight like a weapon. "Show yourself," I demanded. "I know you're here." The temperature dropped and the air grew thick with a dark, oppressive energy. The figure appeared once again, axe in hand. This time I didn't back down. I faced him head-on, refusing to let fear control me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "What do you want?" The figure's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and rage. He raised the axe, but I didn't flinch. I held my ground, determined to get answers. "They need justice," the figure said, his voice a guttural growl. "They need the truth to be known." I nodded, understanding now that the figure wasn't just a malevolent spirit. He was a guardian, a protector of the truth. He was keeping the spirits trapped until justice was served. With renewed determination, I continued my research. I uncovered a series of letters written by Josiah Moore, the head of the Moore family, that hinted at a financial dispute with a powerful local businessman. I also found records of threats made against the family in the weeks leading up to the murders. I realized that the truth had been obscured by those with power and influence, and the spirits of the Moore family had been left to suffer. Armed with this new information, I contacted a local journalist who had been following the case for years. Together, we pieced together the evidence and published an article that exposed the hidden truths behind the Villisca Axe murders. As the truth came to light, the atmosphere in the house changed. The oppressive energy lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and resolution. I spent one final night in the house, and for the first time, I felt no fear. The spirits of the Moore family appeared to me, their faces serene and grateful. "Thank you," they said. "We can finally rest." The figure with the axe appeared as well, his eyes no longer filled with rage but with a quiet, somber acceptance. He nodded to me and I understood that his duty was fulfilled. The spirits of the Villisca Axe Murder House were finally free. I left the house the next morning, the weight of the experience still heavy on my shoulders. The truth had been uncovered, and the spirits had found peace. But the memory of that night would stay with me forever. The Villisca Axe Murder House remains open to this day, a reminder of the darkness that once lurked within its walls. Visitors still report strange occurrences, but the spirits are no longer trapped. They have moved on, leaving behind only the echoes of their tragic past. I continue my work as a paranormal investigator, driven by the need to uncover the truth and help those who cannot help themselves. The experience in Villisca taught me that there is more to this world than what we see, and sometimes the past needs to be uncovered for the future to be free.